Once upon a time, the internet was full of websites. Websites with cool math games, websites where you could adopt a Google's, and Star Wars fan pages that were fronts for the CIA's covert communications in hostile foreign territories. Also, Akinator. Yep, from 2004 to 2013, the United States Central Intelligence Agency created hundreds upon hundreds of fake websites to communicate with informants throughout the world. And they weren't all about Star Wars, they were about rugs, and guns, and Johnny Carson, and soccer, and music, and even Johnny Carson. The list goes on. Unfortunately, these spy sites were so terrible, so unsecured, and so sloppily made that they compromised US intelligence infrastructure around the world and got many informants captured and even killed by their home countries. So today, we're looking at what happened there. What are these sites? How do they work? And how did the CIA screw up so royally? Let's start with what all this is even for. As I said, these websites were covert communication tools. Basically, ways for informants to pass information to the CIA without their home country being any the wiser. Many of these sites were built for informants in Iran, whose nuclear program the US government was very worried about at the time. The US hasn't had a diplomatic presence in Iran since the hostage crisis of 1979 to 1980, so as of the early 21st century, it was pretty practically and logistically difficult to set up a low-key chat between an Iranian informant and anyone at the CIA. So the agency created a simple, easy-to-use web-based trick that allowed informants to drop intel from any old computer as they wished. So let's say you were a low-status CIA informant in 2010. Not one of their prized assets, but someone with a good bit of info to share. Here's how you'd likely share it once the CIA decided they trusted you. Step 1. They'd build you a phony website to visit like classymotors.net, which is a real one, and looked like this. Step 2. You would go to classymotors.net and surely get distracted by all the classy motors for a bit before getting down to business and spilling national secrets. Step 3. You'd scroll down to what appears to be a search bar on classymotors.net, but instead of searching what's the classiest motor, you put in a special secret password. This would open a login window and you would log in. Once you logged in, it would open up a messaging function, and Step 4. You type in whatever you wanted to tell the CIA. Et voila! Espionage complete. Independent researchers claim to have found 885 of these CIA sites, each one assigned to one informant, presumably to decrease the risk that if one of them got caught, they'd drag a bunch of others down with them. Of course, that's exactly what happened, but before we get to that, let's have a look at these things. With the help of the Wayback Machine, we can see what this fake Star Wars fan page, and so many of its brothers and cousins, looked like back in the day. Obviously, there's a lot going on here, but my favorite part is Master Yoda's favorite games because they are for Star Wars video games. I would have guessed he would be into like chess or something called Clorp that only exists in prequel cutscenes or something, but instead, the CIA has imagined that Yoda kicks back and plays video games from an alternate universe wherein he is a fictional character. This is a fascinating take on Yoda. Some other CIA sites at the time included IranianGoals.com, which is unfortunately about soccer rather than various Iranian people's personal goals. There's also AllJohnny.com, where you could submit your favorite Carson moment, especially if your favorite Carson moment is, my government has acquired weapons-grade uranium. There's also WineConnoisseur.net, which spells connoisseur Frenchly but leaves wine in English, and links to actual wine blogs Corked and Uncorked, which I assume are rivals. There was even Armashoy.com, a Spanish-language gun site where you could avoid arousing suspicion from your government that you were spying by arousing suspicion from your government that you're really into guns. Some of the better graphic design, though. But of course, graphic design was the least of the issues with these sites. The most of the issues was how easy it was to figure out that they had a secret messaging system and to connect all the different ones to each other. Now, we don't know exactly how Iran identified and brought down this comm system, but we do know they basically Googled all the sites, likely exploiting some or all of the following many weaknesses in how they were built. First, it wasn't hard to figure out that there was a messenger in here, even though there's no mention of a chat room for Jedi or whatever. This is because of the site's source code, which anyone can pull up by right-clicking, or with some keyboard command that I keep doing accidentally, even though I don't know what it is. The site's secret functions were explicitly named in the code. The HTML for the search bar named it password, and a quick glance at the code also found functions named message and compose. Pretty clear indications of a password-protected messaging system. Second, once you figured out that one of these sites wasn't what they seemed, it wasn't so hard to identify a whole bunch of others. Some of the reasons were vaguely techy, having to do with what coding language and software platforms supported the sites, but others were just sloppy, like the way they handled the sites' IP addresses. See, each site had its own IP address, presumably to make it harder to connect them to each other. Nothing wrong with that in theory, two things wrong with that in practice. Thing one being that a single IP address can host tens of thousands of websites, so if you know the CIA ones are on dedicated servers, you could narrow your search to sites with their very own IP addresses, which would be sort of rare. Thing two, and this is the bigger thing, the CIA purchased IP addresses in big bundles, which meant that tons of their sites had neighboring IP addresses. So generally, if a government caught one spy site, they could find more by just changing the last digit of the IP address a bunch of times, and boom, you now have a list of spy sites. You can track who's using them, and ta-da, spies caught. So how did such a bad system survive so long? Surely the intelligent folks at the Central Intelligence Agency knew this was about as secure as a Swiss cheese door. Certainly, some did. One guy at the CIA was saying the system was compromised as early as 2008, 5 years before informants started disappearing. But unfortunately, the system was simple, and most people felt good about it, and alternatives were hard to come by, so a system that was developed for use in countries without a very sophisticated digital counterintelligence operation ended up being used in places like Iran and China that were more than capable of catching on. Iran figured it out with the help of a double agent, exposed 20 spies using the sites, and used Google to find tons of other sites with similar digital signifiers and started to break the system down. China, potentially independently, potentially on some kind of tip, cracked this thing as well around the same time. And around 2013, informants started going missing, going to prison, and/or being killed. By 2021, the CIA believed most of their spy network in Iran was gone. And in case you're wondering whether the agency stuck its neck out to protect or aid the informants done in by their sloppiness, it didn't. Reuters spoke to a handful of caught Iranian spies that got completely screwed over, to put it lightly, and one mentioned that his training with the CIA didn't even include tips on avoiding detection, which, in my opinion, probably would have been useful to share. All this to say, running a covert communications operation is tricky and risky, and once upon a time, the CIA did a really bad job of it and put their own mission and their informants' lives in a lot of danger. But at least they told us what Master Yoda's favorite games were. Today, the URL starwarsweb.net just redirects you straight to cia.gov. No fronting anymore. Meanwhile, Star Wars blogs covering this story assure readers that they're not CIA fronts, but just fans of Star Wars, which, of course, is what a CIA front would say. Or in Star Wars terms, it's a trap! But you know what's not a trap? This video sponsor, Ground News. It's getting harder and harder to sort fact from fiction in today's news landscape. You click some article and for all you know, it's good journalism, intentionally disinformational slop, or a CIA front. That's where Ground News comes in. You look up a story, say this one about a guy who got caught trying to hand off US government secrets, and Ground News pulls up over 100 articles on the topic and shows you at a glance the political bias, ownership, and factuality of every source that's covered in the story. They also describe the difference in how the right and left talk about the story. In this case, right-wing sources paint the information as politically motivated and Trump-hating, while the handful of lefty sources don't. In short, Ground News wants you better informed, and so do I. That's why we're offering 40% off a Ground News subscription when you go to ground.news/halfasinteresting or click the link below. Stay informed, spot bias, sign up now.